How's it going, everyone? It's me, Lone, and welcome back to another Fallout 76 video. So this is a video that I'm pretty pumped to make, only because I believe it's going to be of benefit to most of you out there. Whether you're a brand new Fallout 76 player and you just picked up the game for the first time, or maybe you've played the game for a couple of months or so now, or even if you're a long-time player and you've put like hundreds upon hundreds of hours into the game, I believe this video is going to be helpful to most, if not all of you out there. And that's because this video is going to detail some of the best locations in the game to be able to farm legendary enemies. And of course, the relevance of that is it's going to help you be able to farm legendary weapons and armor pieces in the game. Naturally, it's been a question that's been asked since the launch of the game, since release, right? People want to know where are the best locations to be able to find these legendary enemies, because that's how the really good legendary weapons and armor pieces get spawned in the first place. They begin somewhere, right? So I wanted to make a video that's updated for 2020, because naturally, as things change in the game and as people find better locations and better ways to find these legendary enemies, the answer that you would give to someone asking the questions of where they should go in the game is going to change. So I want to make sure that there is a current and up-to-date video for 2020 that details some of these really good locations. But before we get into it, there is a few things that you need to bear in mind when it comes to farming legendary weapons and armor pieces in the game. First and foremost, these are just 10 locations. This is not meant to be a comprehensive, catch-all video that talks about every single possible location in the game where a legendary enemy can spawn, because that would be absolutely impossible, right? They're everywhere, but these are some of the really good locations where if you go to, more often than not, you're going to find at least one or two legendary enemies, maybe none if you're very unlucky. And that's the second point. You're not always going to find legendary enemies in these locations. They tend to pop up more often than other locations, but sometimes you might just be unlucky and you might find none, and that's okay. Third point, you might find that all the enemies are already dead, because a lot of these locations that I'll mention are fairly popular, so people go there all the time. So if you're on a server where someone's already cleared out all the enemies, you're not going to find anyone there unless they've spawned back, right? So keep that in mind, especially for some of the locations that I mentioned earlier on in the video. They tend to be the more popular ones that people will go to first. And not even just for legendary farming, but also for XP farming, because some of these enemies like ghouls and super mutants that pop up there give great amounts of XP. And they also happen to be legendary from time to time. So there are two reasons there why some of these locations might be completely just wiped out before you even get the chance to fight some of those enemies. So keep that in mind too. Lastly, some of the great ways that you can actually get legendary enemies and weapons and armor pieces, of course, in the game is by doing certain events. And if you are interested in me covering some of the best events out there to find legendary enemies, let me know in the comments below. But for this video, I'll just be covering locations, things that you don't actually have to wait for, because as you know, with most events in the game, you have to wait till they pop up on the map. I want to give you 10 tried and true locations where no matter where you spawn, no matter what world you're in, you can go to these locations, and if they haven't been cleared out yet, you could probably find at least one or two legendary enemies. And the footage that I'm about to show you in this video, I haven't gone through these locations like 2 or 3 times to make it look really good and me finding all these legendary enemies. I played for an hour and I went through all these locations once. Most of them I found at least one legendary enemy. I think there was like 2 of them where I didn't find any. So again, it's RNG, it's just based on luck, and you might get very lucky some runs or very unlucky other runs. But if this video is of help for you, please let me know in the comments below if there's anything else I can clarify. Please give it a like and a subscribe if you're new. But with all that out of the way, let's get to some of the best locations in the game where you can farm legendary weapons and armor. Alrighty, so first up, let's cover one of the elephants in the room, and that of course is West Tek Research Center. Many of you watching this video probably knew that I was going to mention this location because it is so popular, and rightly so. It is one of the best locations in the game to find legendary enemies, both for the outside area and of course in the interior. But there's a few things that you need to bear in mind when it comes to West Tek. First of all, again, it's very popular, and because of that, you might find more often than not when you go there that most of the enemies are already dead, and that can be unfortunate. So you might need to server hop a couple of times to be able to find a Westech that is full of enemies. But once you do go there when it's full of enemies, you typically find at least 1 to 2 legendary enemies there, and specifically, of course, they are super mutants, and yes, they can range anywhere from 1 to 2 to 3 stars. In this run, I believe I found first up a 3-star legendary enemy, though it exploded and I had to find where the body went, but I found it eventually anyways. Keep that in mind, try not to explode cars as you're killing legendary enemies, because it can make the bodies pretty much impossible to find. However, something that you need to bear in mind as well when it comes to Westech is that when it comes to the super mutants in the outside area, they can be lower leveled sometimes. So if you go there and you're a higher level player and you're looking for the higher level weapons and armor pieces, of course, if they're lower level super mutants there, they're not going to drop those weapons and those armor pieces for you. So you might want to just completely skip that area if you find that they are lower leveled. I've seen them like, you know, around the 10s sometimes. But once you get to the interior, it will fix that up for you and it'll be much better. They will be pretty much scaled to your level. So the interior is really where you want to go if those outside areas are lower leveled. But that's obviously of benefit to some of you lower level players out there. If you sneak around the outside of Westech and you notice that these super mutants are lower leveled, that might be perfect for you to be able to get some lower leveled legendary weapons and armor pieces out there for you to use as you level up. But once you get inside, that's where the real fun begins. Typically, I find at least 1 to 2 legendary super mutants in there, and they can range anywhere from 1 to 2 to 3 stars. It's a great location. Great location again for finding XP and for getting gunpowder and other materials as well. So that is why Westech is so popular. You should definitely go there whenever you spawn into a new world and you need some XP and some legendary enemies. You should go there just to check and see if it's been cleared out yet. But for now, let's get to the next location. Alrighty, Harper's Ferry and the Burrows. Now, technically, these are 2 locations, but I've combined them together because they are so close together in the world. If you're going to go to Harper's Ferry, or if you're going to go to the Burrows, you might as well go to the other location, because they're literally right next to each other. But when you do go there, just keep in mind a couple of things. The Harper's Ferry area, they can be different enemies there. So whether it's Scorched or Ghouls or Super Mutants, I've seen all 3 of those enemy types spawn at any one time. So some of them might give different levels of XP or whatever it might be. But you usually should find, on the upper area, I think I usually safely find 1 legendary enemy, maybe 2. But if that's wiped out for you, or if there aren't any legendary enemies there, the beauty is that then you can just go down to the Burrows and see if there are any there. And again, the Burrows, I usually find at least 1 or 2. So that's the great beauty about Harper's Ferry and the Burrows. It's an awesome combination that typically you can find at least overall. I tend to find at least 2 legendary enemies. Again, you might get unlucky. You might get unlucky with one location, but not the other. If it's both, then I'm sorry, but it tends to be a very good location or 2 good locations, which is why I've mentioned them. Alrighty, so third, we have the Charleston Capitol Building. This is another one of those locations where you might find some lower level enemies on the outside, only because of where it is on the map. But once you get inside to the DMV, then you'll actually find some nicely leveled enemies, potentially some of which might be legendary. There are a bunch of ghouls there, so when you go through, you'll get some great XP along with it. And of course, ghouls give some nice loot as well if you're interested to try and loot and trying to get some nice materials and other supplies. But yes, you usually find at least 1, sometimes 2 legendary enemies. I typically haven't gotten luckier than that. I usually find 1 in Charleston Capitol Building like I did in this video. But it's another one of those locations where you should just go to as part of your routine. So Charleston Capitol Building, one of the tried and true locations for finding legendary enemies in Fallout 76. Alrighty, so fourth, we got the White Spring Resort. Again, this is another one of those locations that a few of you probably knew that I was going to mention, because yes, it is a solid location to be able to find legendary enemies in the game. It's one of those locations where people like to nuke because of just like flux farming, and if you nuke it, you tend to find some more legendary enemies there, particularly some 3-star glowing ghouls, which is nice. But even if you go there without it being nuked, you still have a good chance to find legendary ghouls there. Though it's one of those locations I should mention that sometimes I can go through it and not find any at all. It happens a lot. It's one of those locations that I like to go when I'm XP farming. It's usually the first that I go, on top of West Tech as well, of course. So I usually go there for XP farming, and sometimes I can find 0 legendaries. I tend to find West Tech is much better than White Springs, but you might find it different in your experience. Again, of course, because it's all random generated. So it's still good. It's still worth a look, especially because of the legendary run and getting some nice XP from the ghouls. But I tend to find maybe 1, sometimes 0 legendary enemies. But again, you should definitely check it out if you have the time free in the game. Alrighty, so Huntersville is next. This is one of the locations that I found suggested by a few people actually in the subreddit for Fallout 76, and all of those sources are linked in the description below, by the way, if you do want to check them out, because those people have mentioned some other nice locations to be able to find legendary enemies in the game, and I will mention some of the honorable mentions at the end of this video. But when it comes to Huntersville, it is a decent location. I've gone there a couple of times and I have found legendary super units, and they tend to be nicely high leveled as well, even though it's not an interior area. I don't know whether if there is a chance for those enemies to be lower leveled, because I haven't gone there that often. Like, I know for sure when it comes to West Tech that you can find lower leveled super mutants there because it's an outside area. And again, I don't know if that's the case with Huntersville. You might find some lower level super mutants there, but it's worth a look because I have found a legendary enemy there or 2. So another good location. You should totally check out Huntersville, and thank you to those that did suggest it in the subreddit. Alrighty, so next up we have a bunch of different locations in the game, and just generally these are the Fisher sites in Appalachia, where of course the Scorched Beasts spawn from. Now, I tend to find that most Scorched Beasts that spawn from the Fisher sites, of course, are not legendary. But from time to time, especially in certain areas of the map, particularly the bottom right area of the map, sometimes I find, legendary Scorched Beasts spawn, but they're usually 1-star too. This is not one of my tried and true methods of finding legendary enemies in the game. And of course, Scorched Beasts are a little harder and a bit more finicky to kill. So if you are slightly lower leveled and you're a melee build, for instance, or if you just have a tough time taking out Scorched Beasts, maybe not one of the things that you want to try. But if you can take them out, and if you have the time, feel free to fast travel to different Fisher sites in the game. And sometimes you can find, again, typically 1-star Scorched Beasts. That's usually what I find when I go to Fisher sites. But they can be 2 and they can be 3-star if you are particularly lucky. So I definitely suggest checking it out if you can take on Scorched Beasts, but if you can't, there are some other locations that I'll mention now. So next up we have Fort Defiance, the location of, in my opinion, one of the more fun events in Fallout 76 being Line in the Sand. And I'll really quickly mention that sometimes with Line in the Sand, I see Scorched Beasts spawn that are legendary. It doesn't happen that often, and from memory, it's been like a handful of times that I've seen it. So if you do see Line in the Sand spawn, definitely try to see if there is a legendary enemy there, but typically that event is more for farming XP more than anything else, and it's not really one of the events that I would suggest for legendary enemy farming. So where you really want to go is inside Fort Defiance. There you will find a lot of ghouls which are decently leveled, and again you might find some legendary enemies in there. I did find one when it came to this footage, literally right at the end. Like, I thought I didn't find any, and I was like, all right, well, this is going to be crap footage. But I did. Literally right at the end, I thought I would keep looking a little bit more to see if I could find any more ghouls. And I managed to find a single legendary ghoul there. And it was literally right at the end. So with this location, because it is so tricky to kind of maneuver yourself around, it's very helpful if you have the marsupial mutation, by the way, just to jump up higher through the cracks in the roof and the floors. But yes, I did manage to find one legendary enemy, and they can be hard to find. So just make sure you look properly. Make sure you're not missing any ghouls that are there, because some of them can be legendary. But now let's get to the next location. So third last, we have the National Isolated Radio Array, and this is another one of those locations that was mentioned by multiple people, in fact, in the Fallout 76 subreddit as being a good location to find and to farm legendary enemies in the game. Unfortunately, when I went there as part of my playthrough, I didn't find any legendary enemies, but of course, I was simply unlucky. It's simply RNG. If you go there in the game, in your own world, chances are that you might find 1 or 2 legendary enemies. I've seen people confirm this, and I do remember in the past coming to this location a couple of times and finding some legendary enemies. So they definitely spawn here. You just got to come here every now and again, include it as part of your rotation. But yeah, thank you again to those in the subreddit that did suggest this location. I've cited all my sources again in the description below, so check it out if you want to try and find some legendary enemies in the game. So second last, we have the General Steakhouse in the Cranberry Bog region in Appalachia. And this is one of those locations where when I go, I usually find at least one legendary super mutant, sometimes two. And again, a couple of people here and there mentioned it in the Fallout 76 subreddit when somebody asked the question. I will say though that I don't think General Steakhouse is as popular as like the West Tex and the Harper's Ferries and the White Spring, right? So if you go here, I think you'll find more often than not that the enemies in the area aren't cleared out because it isn't as popular. So it might actually be a popular location for some of you out there just because it is not usually frequented by other players in the game, though that might change because I'm mentioning it now. But anyways, as soon as you watch this video, go there, and I think that the chances are that you'll find some enemies there and hopefully some legendary enemies. So yes, the General Steakhouse is a good location to find legendary weapons and armor pieces in Fallout 76. And finally, we have the Robco Research Center, a different type of enemy, finally, when it comes to this legendary weapons and armor piece guide, because you can actually kill some robots here. If you haven't noticed, most of the enemies that I've mentioned in the locations in this video are typically super mutants or ghouls. So it's nice to be able to kill something different, especially for you troubleshooters out there. But yes, Robco Research Center is definitely a very good location to try and find legendary enemies in the game. Even on the outside as well, like there is a sentry bot that spawns there that more often than not for me can be legendary and can be 2 or 3 star. So it's something that I always check. But yes, if you go inside the research center too, you might find some Protectrons or other robots in the game that can be legendary. So it's definitely a good location. But again, please be sure to check on the outside of the research center before you head in, because there are some nooks and crannies there with some robots that can be legendary that you shouldn't miss before you go into the inside. So I do like Robco Research Center. It's definitely a location that you should check out for some legendary enemies. And just to end this video, I want to reference some honorable mentions when it comes to locations to find legendary enemies in the game. Wendigo Cave is a good location. It's one that literally just missed the cut for this video, but when I was recording it, I did find one legendary enemy, but it just tends to not be a location that I go to spawn or to farm legendary enemies. I tend to prefer the other ones, and I guess just because of RNG, I happened to find one when I went there for the recording. So Wendigo Cave is a good one, so it's definitely something that should be part of your rotation. Also as well, another one from the Fallout 76 subreddit, apparently Braxton's Quality Medical Supplies is another good location, and as is Dyer Chemical. Multiple people mention both of those locations as being solid to try and find some legendary enemies. So there are some honorable mentions for you, but the ones that I mentioned in this video as the top 10 should be enough for the time being, and then you can supplement those locations with other areas that you like in the game. But again, let me know in the comments below if you want me to make a video that talks about some really good events to find legendary enemies in the game, because there are some decent events out there that can spawn 1, 2, or even 3 legendary enemies. Uranium Fever is definitely one of them, but let me know if you want the full video. But for now, let's get to the conclusion. Alrighty, Wastelanders, that's all from me. Let me know in the comments below if there's anything I can clarify. And the beauty, I think, of this video is that I guarantee you that multiple people in the comments have mentioned other locations that I simply haven't referenced because I was only doing 10 of them. So check the comments. I guarantee you there's some other great locations to be able to farm legendary enemies in the game. But again, I hope you enjoyed this video. Until next time, this has been the Lone Vault Wanderer. Please take care of yourselves, and would you kindly keep fighting the good fight.